Hopelessness is one of the most deceptive conditions of the human soul. It is not always loud. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just whispers. Sometimes it wears a suit and tie. It walks into church, lifts its hands in worship, says amen to the preacher, and goes home and cries behind closed doors. Hopelessness is not always obvious. It doesn't always show up in tears or tantrums. Sometimes it shows up in silence, in the slow fade of your dreams, the quiet surrender of your ambitions, and the subtle erosion of your expectations. You stop expecting the phone call. You stop applying for the job. You stop writing the book. You stop praying like you used to. And then you say, I'm fine. But you're not fine. Functioning in a fog. You see, hopelessness has a way of tricking you into believing that the temporary is eternal. It magnifies the moment and mutes the future. It will take a single failure and stretch it across your entire life. One heartbreak, and you start believing love is no longer for you. One loss, and you convince yourself you're cursed. One closed door, and you throw away the whole building. But I came to expose the lie. Hopelessness is not the absence of help. It is the absence of perspective. You don't need a miracle as much as you need a mirror. Because sometimes the greatest breakthrough doesn't happen around you. It happens within you. When you begin to see again, not with your eyes, but with your spirit, then hope is resurrecting. I remember a moment in my own life when every door I knocked on seemed bolted shut. Every call I made led to voicemail. I had vision, I had plans, I had passion, but nothing was moving. I began to doubt what I knew God had spoken over me. And one night, in the quiet of my room, I whispered, maybe I missed it. Maybe this is it. I felt the chill of discouragement creeping in. And in that moment, God didn't send a lightning bolt. He didn't open heaven and shout. He gave me a picture, a mental image of a seed buried deep in the dirt. And I heard in my spirit, it's not dead, it's planted. And I want to say that to you today. You're not buried, you're planted. There's a difference. When something is buried, it's meant to be forgotten. But when something is planted, it's meant to grow. Hopelessness will tell you that the darkness around you is the end. But what if it's not a grave? What if it's the womb of something greater? You see, hopelessness is powerful not because it takes away your future, but because it makes you stop looking for it. That's why the enemy doesn't fight your present. He fights your perspective. He attacks your sight. Because if you ever saw what God still had planned, you'd rise. You'd fight again. You'd speak again. You'd dream again. You'd believe again. And that's why I came for you today. Not for your money, not for your applause, but for your hope. Because if I can ignite even a flicker of it in your spirit, that flicker can become a flame. And that flame can light up an entire future you thought you'd lost. You are not finished. You are not forgotten. And you are certainly not forsaken. So when you feel like all hope is lost, don't reach for the rope. Reach for the reason you're still breathing. And because if God woke you up this morning, it's not done with you yet. There is something deeply sacred about the pit. It doesn't look holy. It doesn't feel spiritual. But the pit is where God hides some of his greatest treasures. You see, man celebrates the mountaintop, but God often prepares his champions in the pit. The pit strips you. The pit breaks you. The pit humbles you. But most importantly, the pit reveals what you couldn't see at the palace gate. Who you really are. When we find ourselves in the pit, whether it's the pit of depression, financial ruin, betrayal, or confusion, we tend to ask, why me? But let me tell you, that's the wrong question. The better question is, what now? Because purpose is not canceled just because you're in a low place. In fact, the pit is often the birthplace of purpose. Think of Joseph. The boy had dreams, visions of greatness, divine insight. But the moment he shared his vision, life turned. His brothers threw him into a pit. Not because they didn't believe in his dream, but because they did. The enemy often attacks you, not because you're weak, but because you're carrying something powerful. Joseph wasn't thrown into a pit because he was ordinary. You're not being attacked because you're small. You're being attacked because you're significant. The pit was never the end of Joseph's story. It was just a chapter. And let me say this clearly. A chapter is not a conclusion. Some of you have judged your entire life based on one dark chapter. But what you call the end, God calls the setup. Joseph was stripped of his coat, but not his calling. He lost his position, but not his purpose. The pit didn't rob him of his destiny, it revealed it. It's in the pit that you learn to depend on God, not gifts. In the palace, people praise your performance. But in the pit, there is no applause. There is no spotlight. There is just you, your questions, and your God. And it's there in the silence, in the stillness, that purpose begins to rise out of the rubble. You don't discover your real identity in the applause of others. You discover it in isolation. You find your strength when all the scaffolding is removed and all you have is the raw, unfiltered presence of God. The pit becomes the proving ground. It is where faith is refined, vision is tested, and character is forged in fire. I've been in the pit. I know what it feels like to be forgotten, overlooked, dismissed, and devalued. But I also know that sometimes God lets you sit in the pit so he can prove to you that your calling is not dependent on public opinion. That your destiny was never in the hands of those who rejected you. That purpose does not need permission to come forth. David was anointed to be king, but what did God do after that? He sent him back to the field, then to a cave, then to a wilderness. Why? Because God never puts a crown on a head that hasn't been bowed in brokenness first. There is no throne without the pit, no crown without the cave, no resurrection without the cross, and no glory without the story. So if you're in the pit right now, don't curse it. Look around. Ask God, what are you trying to birth in me? Because the pit is not punishment, it's preparation. Something is forming in you that could never form in comfort. And when you come out, and you will come out, you won't just be grateful for the palace. You'll understand the value of the pit. Because it was in that dark place, that lonely place, that seemingly forgotten place, that purpose, divine purpose, was ignited. There is something about the valley that clouds your vision. It's not that your destiny has disappeared. It's that your perspective has been distorted. Valleys have a way of making everything look smaller, darker, and more hopeless than it really is. When you are surrounded by mountains, you forget how wide the sky is. You forget how far you've come. You forget what God showed you on the mountain before you ever entered the valley. You see, sight is limited to what your eyes can see in the natural. But vision is what your spirit sees in the invisible. And I want to tell you this. You don't need eyes to have vision. You need faith. You need conviction. You need a memory of what God spoke to you in the light so you can carry it through the night. Vision is the oxygen of the soul. Without it, you suffocate. And you don't die because of what happened to you. You begin to die because you stop seeing beyond it. When you lose vision, you lose direction. And when you lose direction, you wander. That's how people get stuck. Not because they're weak, but because they forgot where they were going. Pain distracted them. Fear blinded them. Delay discouraged. But hear me. God never gives you a dream based on your current condition. He gives you a vision based on your future position. And what he shows you in the spirit cannot be measured by your circumstances. That's why the vision often looks impossible, because it comes from a realm not bound by human limits. I think of Abram. Before he became Abraham, God told him, look up, count the stars, so shall your descendants be. Yet at that moment he had no son, no heir, nothing to prove the promise except a word and a vision. Why would God give him a starry vision in a barren season? Because God knows that when you're walking through a valley, you need something above you to keep moving forward. You need a vision that transcends your now and pulls you into your next. That's why you can't let your current valley define your final outcome. Valleys are real, but they are also transitional. Nobody builds a house in a valley. You pass through it. Psalm 23 doesn't say, yea, though I live in the valley. It says, though I walk through it. You are not meant to stay there. But if you lose vision in the middle, you'll start treating a temporary place like a permanent address. You might be unemployed right now, but that's not your address. You might be heartbroken, but that's not your home. You might be confused, but confusion is not your calling. You might be in a valley, but vision will keep you walking through it. The enemy will love nothing more than to blind you in the valley, to whisper in your ear, it's over, nothing good is coming. This is the best it will ever be. But the devil is a liar. If God gave you a vision, it's because there's something on the other side of this that's worth pressing toward. And the proof that there's something valuable in your future is the resistance you're facing right now. Vision gives pain a purpose. It transforms suffering into strategy. It tells you, I may cry today, but I'm building something tomorrow. I may be pressed, but I'm not crushed. I may be in the dark, but light is still inside me. Vision will make you praise in the valley, plan in the storm, and prepare in the drought, because you know deep down that where you are is not. I've had moments in my life where everything around me said give up. Moments where people who once applauded me grew silent. Where doors that were wide open slammed shut. And in those moments, I had to reach back, not to what I saw, but to what I believed. I had to hold on to the vision when nothing made sense. Some of you have forgotten what God showed you before the trouble started, but it's still there. It's still alive. And you don't need to see it in the natural to believe it in the spirit. If you still have vision, you still have victory. Because even in the valley, vision will carry you through.